The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and sealed with a wax stamp, my mother's signature touch. Even in death, Claire Prescott did things her way. I opened it on the porch of the house she left me, the house I grew up in, the one she refused to sell even when the roof leaked and the plumbing moaned in protest. Inside was her final letter, tucked between legal documents and a copy of the will. "My Camille," it read in her looping cursive, "this house is yours. You gave me my final years with dignity and laughter. No one else has a claim to that." I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. It was the first time I'd allowed myself to cry since her funeral. Not because of grief exactly, but because of something else, something deeper. Validation. For years, I'd been the one flying in for her doctor's appointments, fixing broken hinges, chasing away the cold with warm soup and half-finished crossword puzzles. My husband, Daniel, had supported me in quiet ways. He held down our home in Connecticut, paid bills, stayed out of the way. We were a good team. Or so I believed. I moved into the Vermont house a month after she passed. I wasn't running away. I just needed air. Space. I turned the back room into an art studio and planned to host seasonal workshops for women in transition, retirees, widows, newly divorced, women like me. I thought I was entering the gentlest chapter of my life, until Janice showed up. She arrived without warning, her red blazer bright and sharp as her voice. "This place brings back memories," she said, stepping inside like she owned it. I offered her coffee. She declined. Then she slid a manila folder across the table. "This is just a courtesy. I wanted you to know before the lawyers reached out." Inside, a petition to freeze the property. I blinked. "You're challenging the will?" "I'm not challenging the will," she said. "I'm asserting a shared legal interest. Daniel's name was on the refinance agreement in 1999. Technically, your mom used marital equity to renovate this place. That makes half of it subject to joint asset review." My stomach dropped. That was a family favor. My mother paid back every cent. Janice shrugged. "There's no paper trail, and Vermont property law doesn't really care about intentions, only signatures." I stared at her, stunned. "Are you serious?" "Look, I don't want this to get ugly," she said, standing, "but if it does, I have to protect my family's interest. Her family, my husband's family." I called Daniel the moment she left, still shaking. "She's bluffing," he said. "She filed," I said. "It's real." He paused. "Too long. She's your sister, Daniel. But this is my mother, my house. You know that, right?" "I do," he said. "But, we'd all rather avoid court, wouldn't we? Maybe there's a way to settle it quietly. Maybe she gets a small percentage and walks away." I stood there, holding the phone, the blood draining from my face. "You're not serious." "I just don't want this to blow up. She's still my sister, and if she's technically right." "Technically right?" I said. "Is that what matters now?" He sighed. "Camille, don't make this a war." But it already was, not just against Janice, but against the man I'd built a life with, who now stood at the center of my mother's house, arms folded, heart closed, refusing to take my side. And suddenly, I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for the last piece of my mother, and the truth about the man I married. The silence between us stretched for days. Daniel didn't call again after that first conversation. He sent one text, something short and diplomatic. "Let's not let this tear us apart." As if it hadn't already started unraveling the second he refused to say the words I needed most. "I've got your back." I stayed in the house, but it no longer felt like mine. Every room echoed with memories of my mother. Her laugh in the kitchen, her knitting needles clicking in the den. But now those memories felt like evidence in a courtroom I never asked to be dragged into. Lisa, our daughter, called that weekend. She'd seen the court filings. Janice had named both me and the estate in the lawsuit, and the documents were public. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said. "I don't know what Dad's thinking." I bit my lip. "He's thinking about keeping the peace." "But what about you?" she asked. "Don't you matter in all of this?" I wanted to tell her I wasn't sure, that maybe I never had. Lisa offered to help. She'd just finished her clerkship, was waiting on bar results, but she knew people. She could connect me with a sharp estate lawyer who specialized in contested wills. "Don't roll over," she said. "This isn't just about a house." She was right. It was about the hours I sat by my mother's side, holding her hand through chemo. About the late nights I drove up from the city with grocery bags and ibuprofen. About every Christmas spent sleeping on that worn-out couch so Mom wouldn't be alone. It was about all the things no lawyer could itemize on a spreadsheet. I hired the attorney Lisa recommended, Miranda Tran. Young, confident, with eyes like polished steel. She's pulling a classic maneuver, Miranda said after reviewing the case, weaponizing a technicality, but don't worry, we fight back with facts. I spent the next week digging through storage boxes and old bank folders. I found emails, handwritten notes, even a photocopy of the check my mother used to pay back the home renovation loan in full. Daniel had signed it, but it was clearly marked as a personal reimbursement. I emailed it to Miranda. She responded with one line. This is gold. But it didn't feel like victory. Because the war wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in my marriage. Daniel and I hadn't spoken in over a week. When he finally drove up to Vermont, unannounced, I found him standing at the edge of the porch, looking at the house like it was foreign to him. You changed the curtains, he said, as if that was what mattered. I crossed my arms. They were sun-bleached. And yours? He hesitated. I'm not here to argue. I just want to know. How far are you planning to take this? As far as I need to, I said. His jaw tightened. Janice is upset. She says you're trying to erase our family from something we helped build. Build? I laughed, bitter. You think this house exists because of a kitchen remodel you co-signed 20 years ago? This place was my mother's soul, and mine. She was grateful we helped, he said. She said it herself. She paid you back, I snapped, and I've got proof. He went quiet. I stepped closer, my voice trembling but firm. What hurts most isn't Janice dragging me into court. It's you sitting beside her like she's the one who needs defending. Daniel looked down. She's my sister. And I'm your wife, I said. At least I thought I was. He flinched, then nodded slowly. I didn't come to fight, he said. I just wanted you to hear me out. I waited. I'm not good at conflict, you know that. And I thought if I stayed neutral, it would keep things from spiraling. Well, I said quietly, you didn't stay neutral. You picked a side. You just didn't have the courage to say it out loud. He didn't deny it. We stood there for a long moment, a gulf of hurt between us. I'm staying here, I said. Through the trial, through whatever comes next. You can stay too, but only if you're with me. He didn't answer, and I didn't repeat the offer. That night, I slept in my mother's room for the first time. The lavender sachets in the drawer still held her scent, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. Because I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, a low hum of whispered voices. It smelled like paper and old coffee, cold, impersonal. But as I stepped inside, carrying a folder full of evidence and memories, it felt like the stage for something much bigger than a legal dispute. Janice sat at the front with her attorney, dressed in an elegant navy suit, her lips pressed into a thin line of calculated civility. She looked at me with the kind of pity only someone convinced they're winning can offer. But I didn't flinch, because this wasn't about her. It was about me, and the woman who raised me. Daniel was there too, sitting beside his sister, my husband, my partner of 30 years. He didn't look at me when I walked past, and that silence was louder than anything he could have said. Miranda leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We've got more than enough to fight this." I nodded, but my heart was already thudding in my chest. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Judge Merrill, opened proceedings with a tone of brisk efficiency. Janice's lawyer went first, painting a picture of shared investments and long-standing family involvement. They referenced the 1999 loan, the name on the title, the supposed verbal promises. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, I held my breath. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. He looked uncomfortable, like the suit he wore didn't quite fit his conscience. My sister believes, he began, that the home was in part made possible by resources from both our families. I was listed on the refinancing document. I handled logistics when Claire, my mother-in-law, was unable to. It wasn't formal, but it felt like a shared contribution. He didn't say my wife disagrees. He didn't say I support Camille. He just hovered in the middle. Safe. Cowardly. I looked at him, my jaw clenched, hands in my lap. He couldn't meet my eyes. Then it was my turn. Miranda stood, calm and focused, and walked the judge through every document we'd compiled. The email from my mother, the repayment check, The bank statements showing that Claire had resumed paying the mortgage loan after Daniel's brief involvement. Then I took the stand. And I spoke. Not with anger, but with clarity. My mother was fiercely independent, I said. She was proud. Proud that she raised me alone, that she paid her debts, that she asked for help only when she truly needed it. She never wanted to burden anyone, especially not her son-in-law. That kitchen renovation? She needed a loan to make the place livable after a storm damaged half the roof. My husband helped her co-sign, yes, but she repaid every cent. I took a breath, steady. This house wasn't just a structure, it was her sanctuary. And mine. I moved in long before she passed. I nursed her through her final months here. I watched her fade. I stayed up through nights of pain, and I held her hand as she took her last breath. This house, it was her gift to me. Her final way of saying thank you. There was silence. Even Janice didn't meet my gaze now. Later, during a recess, I stepped outside for air. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the weight of a pending decision. I found Daniel sitting alone on a bench, staring at the ground. You did what you had to do, he said. No, I replied. I did what you should have done. He looked up, his face pale. I didn't want to choose between you and my sister. But you did, I said. You just didn't choose me. He didn't argue, didn't defend, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something shift in him. Not guilt, but regret. I didn't think it would go this far, he murmured. I crossed my arms. It always goes this far when you leave people to clean up your silence. Back inside, Judge Merrill returned with her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, including documentation of repayment and the decedent's written intent, the court finds that the property in question belongs solely to Camille Weston, as per the terms of Claire Prescott's will. Just like that, it was over. I'd won. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Because the real loss wasn't the house, it was the man who had once vowed to stand beside me and who, when it mattered most, stood across the aisle. I didn't speak to Daniel for 2 weeks after the verdict. Not because I wanted to punish him. Because I didn't know how to be near him without hearing his silence echo louder than his words ever did. The house, my mother's house, now legally mine, felt colder in those first few days. Not because I was alone, but because I finally understood the difference between being alone and being abandoned. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when someone you love doesn't choose you. Not because they stopped loving you, but because they never knew how to fight for you. I busied myself with small things, repainting the kitchen, hanging new curtains, fixing the porch railing. Every stroke of the brush, every hammer of the nail felt like a reclamation, not just of the house, but of myself. Lisa came to visit the weekend after the ruling. She brought groceries and a half-eaten bag of peanut M&Ms, the way she always did in college when I knew something was wrong but she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't say anything about the trial at first. She just unpacked the vegetables, made tea, and sat across from me at the dining table. You know, she finally said, Dad hasn't stopped calling me. I didn't look up. He wants to explain, she continued. Wants to make it right. Does he? I said quietly. Or does he just want to be forgiven without doing the work? Lisa didn't answer. She knew better than to rush me. That night, I found myself sitting in my mother's old recliner, wrapped in the quilt she'd made during her final months. I ran my fingers over the stitched initials, mine, hers, even Daniel's. We'd all been woven into this life together. But some threads fray on their own. I finally picked up the phone and called him. He answered on the first ring. Camille, he breathed. Don't say anything yet, I said. Just listen. He went quiet. I needed time. I still do, but I've made a decision. A pause. Okay, you can't come back here. Not now. Not like before. I understand, but I'm willing to meet, one time, in person, to hear whatever it is you think needs to be said. The line stayed quiet for a second too long. Then, thank you. We agreed to meet at a park halfway between our homes, neutral ground. I arrived first, sitting at a picnic table with a thermos of coffee and a heart that felt steadier than I expected. When he arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, but because I did. I was no longer the woman hoping he'd say the right thing. Now, I was the woman who had learned to live without it. He sat across from me, nervous, searching my face for permission to begin. I don't know how to apologize for something this big, he said. Start small. I replied. He exhaled. I should have stood up for you. From the start, you were right about everything. I let fear and guilt steer me, and it cost me the one thing I should have protected most. I said nothing. I kept telling myself staying out of it made me neutral. But I see now, neutrality is a choice, and it was the wrong one. He looked down, hands folded. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I deserve that. But I needed you to know. I've started therapy. I've been going every week, trying to understand why I freeze when people I love ask me to choose. That caught me off guard. Not because it fixed anything, but because it meant maybe he was finally starting to see the damage he caused. I sipped my coffee. You know what hurt the most? I asked. It wasn't Janice. It wasn't the lawsuit. It wasn't even your testimony. He looked up. It was realizing I had to win just to prove I deserved something that was already mine. And the person I thought would stand beside me was sitting on the other side. His eyes welled. He whispered, I don't hate you, Daniel, I said, but I don't trust you either. Not right now. Can I ever earn that back? I don't know, I replied honestly. Trust isn't something you demand. It's something you build, slowly, quietly, one decision at a time. He nodded. We sat there for a while in the quiet, the wind picking up leaves around our feet, and I realized I didn't need him to beg. I didn't need grand gestures. What I needed was what I'd already found. Peace. The kind you only get after choosing yourself, even when it breaks your heart to do it. Fall turned to winter. The trees around my mother's house dropped their leaves in a quiet surrender, and for the first time in months I felt aligned with the season. Stripped back, bare, but not broken. I didn't hear much from Daniel after that meeting in the park. A few texts, updates about Lisa, an apology here or there, but nothing clingy, nothing entitled. For once, he respected the silence between us as something sacred, not something to be filled with excuses. I spent my mornings in the kitchen, baking bread I never used to have time for. I hosted a small gathering for a few local women, widows, empty nesters, divorcees. We drank tea and shared stories by the fireplace, laughing louder than we probably should have. I called the group Reclamation Tuesdays, because that's what we were all doing, reclaiming something. Time, space, identity, ourselves. Lisa visited often, bringing new books and her sharp, thoughtful perspective. One afternoon, as we sat folding laundry together, she asked softly, Do you miss him? I paused. I miss the version of him who protected me. Do you think that version is gone? I thought about it. No, I said finally. I think he's still in there. But I also think I'm not the same woman who needs protecting in the same way. She smiled, folding a dish towel into a neat square. That's powerful, Mom. That December, I received a package. No return address, just my name, in Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a small wooden box, and inside that, a single photograph. It was me, sitting beside my mother on the porch, arms linked, laughing. Daniel must have taken it years ago. On the back of the photo he had written, For what you protected and what you became. There were no other words. He didn't need them. Later that week I called him. Would you like to come for tea? I asked. He was quiet for a second. Then, I'd like that. When he arrived, he didn't bring flowers or chocolates or any desperate attempts at redemption. He brought only himself. Quieter. Smaller. Changed. We sat in the living room like old friends. He didn't ask to stay. I didn't invite him to. But we talked. About Lisa, about the snow, about therapy, about Janice, who after losing the case had sent a stiff apology email that neither of us quite knew what to do with. And then, as he stood to leave, he turned to me. I'm not asking to come back, he said. I'm just asking if I can keep learning how to be better, around you, for myself. I nodded. That's a good place to start. And as he stepped outside into the cold, I felt something shift, not a return to what we were, but the beginning of something truer. Less polished, more honest. Maybe trust wouldn't come back in one piece. Maybe it would arrive in fragments. But even broken glass, when pieced together with care, can still catch the light. I closed the door behind him and turned toward the quiet house that had once again become fully mine. Not because a judge said so, not because I fought for it, but because I finally understood. This home, this life, this self, had always been mine to claim. Spring came slowly to Vermont that year. The snow melted in uneven patches across the yard, revealing the stubborn buds of daffodils my mother had planted decades ago. Every morning, I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching them push their way up through the thawing earth, determined and quiet. Survivors like me. One Tuesday afternoon, during our weekly gathering, one of the women, Judith, recently widowed, asked me, "So, do you think love can survive betrayal?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room. At Nora, who left a 25-year marriage after her husband gambled away their savings. At Denise, who was raising 2 grandchildren alone because her daughter disappeared into addiction. At Sylvia, who lost her partner not to betrayal, but to Alzheimer's, a slow goodbye that no one prepares for. "I think love can change shape," I said finally. "Sometimes it dies, sometimes it gets buried, but sometimes it sheds the skin of what it used to be and becomes something new, something smaller, quieter, but maybe even more true." They all nodded slowly. Later that night, I recorded that reflection in a journal. It was Lisa's idea, actually. She'd said, "You've lived through something most women are too afraid to speak out loud. Write it, share it, even if it's just for yourself." But it wasn't just for me. It became a blog, then a podcast. I called it The Second Porch because it was on this porch, in this season of my life, that I started again. Women began writing in from across the country. Stories of betrayal, reinvention, grief and grace. I started interviewing some of them. Their voices filled my evenings like a choir of resilience. And Daniel, he listened. Not always with ease, but always with humility. Sometimes he'd send a quiet text after an episode. "Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know it hurt you in that way. I'm still learning." He never pushed, never asked to be part of it, until one day he did. "Would you ever consider recording an episode with me?" he asked over coffee. I stared at him. Why? Because I think men need to hear it too. What it means to fail someone, and what it looks like to take accountability, not to win them back, but to become someone who could be worthy again. I agreed with hesitation. We sat across from each other, mic between us, and spoke the hardest truths of our marriage. Not to relive them, but to release them. We didn't pretend it was perfect. We didn't use the word reconciliation. We used the word respect. The episode went viral. Thousands of women wrote in saying they'd never heard a man speak about betrayal with that kind of ownership. Others said it gave them permission to leave. Some said it gave them permission to stay, with new terms. One letter stuck with me. A woman named Ruth, 63, wrote, "You reminded me that we're never too old to choose ourselves, and never too old to be chosen differently." Daniel and I still live apart. We go for walks, we share meals, we speak without armor now. Sometimes that's enough, and sometimes that's everything. Because in the end, this story was never really about a house. It was about a woman who inherited more than a building. She inherited the strength to say, "This is mine, my grief, my voice, my story, and no one gets to rewrite it but me." This story reminds us that betrayal doesn't always come from infidelity. It can come from silence, from choosing neutrality when someone needs you to take a stand. Camille didn't just win a legal case. She reclaimed her voice, her peace, and her future. What would you have done in her place? Comment 2 if you think Camille was right to walk away, or 7 if you think she should have forgiven her husband. And if you want to hear more powerful, emotional stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe to EN Reddit Story. New episodes every week.